and one man, in fact, spent 3 days, and the temperature at Gettysburg in July 1863 was a lot like it was today. And this man spent 3 days underneath an enormous haystack at the very bottom. He was pulled out at the end barely alive. And one of the local families, and I want to bring this up because I'll come back to it later, was a family, a local black family named Bryan. And the Bryan family, Abraham Bryan and his wife Elizabeth, lived in a little white house that turned out to be at the south side of Cemetery Hill. And he heard word of what was happening in Chambersburg and other towns to the west of them, and he got out of there as quickly as he could. His house, though, stood through the battle and helped shield Union soldiers as they repulsed Pickett and his soldiers in Pickett's charge, which, as many of you know, was the turning point of the Battle of Gettysburg. So an incredibly momentous and ironic sight. So slavery then enters the Battle of Gettysburg and the Gettysburg Campaign as a motive, as a threat, as an assault, as kidnapping, etc. It also enters the story, because many of the soldiers, and here's our main connection at least, many of the Union soldiers who fought at Gettysburg fought against slavery, and many of them were in these, were in the 11th Corps, Union Army Corps, commanded by General Oliver Otis Howard from Leeds, Maine, Bowdoin College graduate, etc., West Point graduate as well. He himself, Howard, was an early abolitionist, and many of the German Americans that he commanded had been ardently anti-slavery. And in fact, some of them had come to the United States in part to have a role in the abolitionist fight. Slavery also, I think, enters the account of the Gettysburg Campaign because anti-slavery motivated a number of black male civilians who wanted badly to repulse the Confederates as they moved north, and who were refused to participate in the Union Army by Abraham Lincoln at the time. He said it was too soon. Pennsylvania was just organizing regiments of its own, but they did take part in one little campaign just north and east of Gettysburg just before the first days of July. So if slavery, the topic of slavery, has been a part of Gettysburg's story for forever, then what happened to it? Where did these stories go? Why were they so neatly edited away? To help answer that, we're going to move now to the battle's aftermath. The battle has been fought. 50,000 men, and some female civilians as well, have sustained casualties. The blood's dried. The stench has lingered quite a long time. People, even into the fall in Gettysburg, are having to go around with handkerchiefs tied to their faces with peppermint oil, helping them to live and breathe through the stench. But the battle is over. And again, what's happened to these stories? In the beginning, slavery plays a part in the recollection of Gettysburg. And we can see this, of course, in the first formal interpretation of the battle that takes place, as you know, mid-November 1863, with two famous, or at least one famous Gettysburg Address and one less famous Gettysburg Address. Mr. Lincoln, of course, gives a very short, impassioned, very politic speech to help honor soldiers who are being buried in a Union cemetery. And he talks specifically about these men who have sacrificed their lives to a country dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. And he speaks about a new birth of freedom. He's not naming it, but few people doubt that he is making a reference to slavery and to freedom from slavery. Then the guy who gives the real the very long Gettysburg Address, the one nobody ever talks about, a man named, Congressman named Edward Everett from Massachusetts. And he's more specific. He blasts the slavery-loving Confederacy. He honors free African Americans who were threatened. He also honors women who participate, and of course he honors soldiers who he says were fighting for the Union and for freedom. So slavery, right off the bat, is very much a powerful component of the story of Gettysburg. Shortly after the war, the Confederate historians have their turn. General Jubal Early, who had fought at Gettysburg, who was even, Robert E. Lee said he was a nasty man. Oh, he had been jilted by a girlfriend from the North, I think sometime during the war, and boy, and then he did, a lot of people think he didn't do very well at Gettysburg. Then it went downhill from there. He hid in Mexico and Canada. After a while, came back to the United States after the war and helped found the Southern Historical Society. Everybody's to blame but Jubal Early for things that happened in the Civil War, but of course he's going to deny that slavery had anything much to do with the Confederacy. Particularly he likes to blame South Carolinians, like James Longstreet, for things that happened in the war rather than Virginians. Virginians helped found the Historical Society. So he starts sort of the kind of counterweight to the Lincoln story here. But for a couple of decades after Gettysburg, there isn't much talk about the battle. It's still too new. The grief is still too real. People are traumatized. No veterans want to go back and talk about it. So it's not until the mid-1880s that you start to see people, particularly at the site itself, start to talk about the battle and start to kind of rehash it and reinterpret it. In the 1880s, as I said, you start seeing Union veterans groups coming back and putting up monuments and statues to their work at Gettysburg. They are very careful to do some historic editing themselves. When they ran away and ran back through town on the first day of the battle, they call it a withdrawal or a repositioning. So they have a very nice spin on things. And they also stage reunions. And these reunions are Union reunions only. There is no question that they will not be inviting Confederate veterans. Slavery-loving Confederate veterans, as many of them put it, to these reunions. And at the same time, again, this is in the end of the 19th century, the Battlefield Park becomes a tourist site for African Americans. They come by the trainload from Baltimore, from Philadelphia, from Washington, sometimes to come and have a picnic and a dance at Little Round Top, where there was a big pavilion set up and ice creams were sold, and all people did some dancing and so forth, but also to honor the place where the Union Army had achieved a great victory and moved the country towards emancipation. And then things begin to shift. It's the turn of the 20th century. And in the shifting, the Jubal Early's version of the war, then the Governor McDonald's version of the war, begins to take hold, not only in the academy among scholars, but also at the site of Gettysburg itself. The context for this, beginning of the 20th century, we have got the economy and a huge number of recessions at the end of the 19th century. We have the Spanish-American War, founded in part on ideas of very specific race hierarchy, white man's burden, in other words. We also have a new set of immigrants moving into the United States and frightening people with their new ideas and their poverty. We have ideas and their poverty. We have new shifting alliances, political alliances.